Good morning. You guys sound good. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Kristen Lunsford, and for the last 15 years, I've had the privilege of serving alongside your lead pastor, Ryan, in 5 different churches. And as many of you know, in 2011, Ryan and I moved our family to Las Vegas to start a church with no money, no people, and not one half a clue about what we were getting ourselves into. Armed with this amount of support and expertise, we started building a launch team. First, by convincing some of our friends to leave all of their people and all of their money behind in the Midwest and come out and join us. And then by announcing to our neighborhood that we had, in fact, arrived. We started by going door to door to strangers, inviting them to what we were calling an advanced church experience. The basic idea was that people would accept the invitation, they would come over to our house, they would eat some food, they would sit down and hear Ryan cast a vision for this church, they would think we were really cool, and they would agree to be on our launch team. When none of our neighbors showed up, we came up with another awesome idea. An event we called Blitz the Parks. Basic idea was that we would slap on some advanced church labels on some water bottles and some baggies that we filled with dog biscuits from Costco. We would gather at a car, pray, and go out to all the neighborhoods and announce our arrival to unassuming strangers and their little dogs too. I'm not making this up. Here's a photo of us praying. That's Ryan with Landon just going up to some random dude like, here's a water bottle, come to our church. All right, you guys, we didn't know any better. We really didn't, and that would come later. And so we lived in that neighborhood for 2 years. And at some point, I can't quite remember when, but 3 kids from across the street started turning up in our driveway all the time. Anytime we were out there playing with our kids, they would be out there. And we welcomed this initially. We really did. It was good to have them around, good to get to know people. We didn't know anyone. But eventually, it became really annoying because not only did the kids show up within seconds of us pulling into our driveway, and every single time we were out there, but their parents were never, ever with them. And these were little kids. So instead, it was me usually out there on the regular supervising 6 kids under the age of 7 and trying to just control their conduct because clearly somebody needed to. It got so bad that eventually we just stopped going out there. We just stayed in the backyard, stayed in the house, stopped going out front. Only this didn't really make anything better because then what happened was we would come home and their scooters and their bikes would be splayed all across the street, and we'd have to maneuver our van around them like some kind of Mario Kart challenge. I remember just being so angry at their parents. Like, I wanted so badly to just march up to their door, tell their parents the truth about how careless and inconsiderate, rude and neglectful they were being. Then one evening, a few weeks before Christmas, I pulled onto our street and I didn't have to make my way around any bikes or scooters that day. Instead, I had to make my way around a cavalry of emergency vehicles. The kid's dad, who I would later find out suffered from chronic pain and was home all day with the kids while his wife worked as a flight attendant, had taken his own life in front of the 5-year-old. While a pastor's wife stood in the parking lot of her church plant 4 miles away, holding a stack of invite cards she hoped would help lead people in her community to the church and to Jesus. We moved a little over a month later, in part because our 2-year lease was up, but also because I was haunted. Not by the kid's dad, but by the sinking feeling that we had gotten a whole lot wrong in our brazen attempts to be right. I realize this is not the warmest welcome to week 2 of our Love Does series. But here we are, and I'm so grateful to have these few minutes with you. In this series, we're learning to see love in a new way, in a new actionable way, so that we can begin loving in real ways that have real lasting effects on the people around us. So last week, Joe reminded us about what love is, that God is love, and that because we are made in God's image, we have to. It is incumbent upon us to reflect that love to the world around us. And today, I'm going to lead all of us actually, through something that I did wrong for most of my adult life, but that I learned to do better in the years and in the months after we left that street in Las Vegas. Today, we're going to look at how to lead with love, practically and sacrificially, like Jesus did, instead of leading with truth like we usually do. Turn to any one of the Gospels. Those are the first 4 books of the New Testament that record Jesus' life and his teaching. And you'll see Jesus meeting people where they are, expressing love to them in simple, practical ways before ever telling them what he thought about what they were doing or how they should be living their lives. And because he loved people first, we get to love people first. This means prioritizing opportunities for relationship over opportunities to be right. So if you're ready, let's dive into this. Grab your YouVersion app. Just a heads up, I am going to use a couple of verses today from the Message translation. And if you don't know, the Bible is translated in a bunch of different ways. And I found that it's really helpful to listen to different translations, read different translations, because sometimes, especially if you've been around the church for a while, a lot of the stuff you hear and hear and hear again, and it kind of just becomes like wallpaper. It's like you don't even see it. And so one feature of the of the YouVersion app that I really like is the audio version of the Message. The narrator's voice is really cool, and it just has a different feel to it. So if you ever want to check it out on audio, try that. But anyway, we are going to start in 1 John 4:19. We love because he first loved us. It's one of the easiest verses in the Bible to remember, but we forget it all the time. We love because he first loved us. Before Jesus preached one sermon, before he performed one miracle, before he ever told the religious leaders that they were bonkers, he came to us. He loved us. For God so loved the world that he, ... His first, and I would argue his greatest act of love, was leaving heaven in the first place to come and be with us. That was ground zero for Jesus. Jumping out to come down and be among us. Then time after time in his ministry, Jesus' simple acts of love continued to precede the miracles and eventual repentance and obedience of the people he drew to his side. He touched the leper before ever curing him. This simple act of touch was so profound because lepers had this detestable, contagious infection that disfigured and destroyed their bodies. They were cast aside and forced to live out the rest of their days without the touch of another person. And then along comes Jesus with an outstretched hand. Or how about the time he called a tax collector, Zacchaeus, down from a tree, not to berate him for being a jerk and a thief, which he was, but to hang out. He was like, bro, what's up? I want to come over. Jump down from there and show me how to get to your house. And so having Jesus in his home that day changed absolutely everything for Zacchaeus. You can go home today and read about it in Luke chapter 12. So Jesus gained people's trust before telling them the truth. He met their physical needs before ever addressing their spiritual condition. He led with love, prioritizing his relationships with people over any need he could have had to be right. So how do we do the same? How do we love the people in front of us like Jesus did? Well, I've got 4 suggestions for us today that have helped me get better at this over the last several years. And I hope they'll benefit you in your relationship as well. And I'll be talking a lot today about like neighbor relationships, but just insert whatever relationships you know you have in your life that you need, whether it's at your school or in your families or with your coworkers, wherever it is, even within this church. Okay, so just kind of a heads up there. So, in order to lead with love, the first thing we must do is drop the agenda. Can probably all think about a relationship we entered into with a motive, an agenda for that person's lifestyle or their behavior, where we kind of treated them more like a project than a person. You know, maybe it was the time you spent with your daughter's boyfriend only because you wanted to keep him on a short leash. Or maybe it was the young coworker you befriended because her personal life was clearly a disaster and you read I Kiss Dating Goodbye in 2003, and so you have some unsolicited advice to give her. Or maybe it was the neighbor whose kids you tolerated playing in your driveway because all you really wanted was for them to come fill a seat in your church. Whatever it was, no matter how good your intentions, it wasn't your job. Wasn't my. Your job wasn't to convince that person or control that person or even change that person. Our job description as humans is 4 words long, and it comes from Romans 12:9. Let love be genuine. Hear it again from the Message translation. Love from the center of who you are. Don't fake it. Be good friends who love deeply and practice playing second fiddle. Bob Goff, who actually wrote a book that inspired a series like this, he wrote a book called Love Does and another one called Everybody Always, which is phenomenal. He says this: loving people means caring without an agenda. As soon as we have an agenda, it's not love anymore. It's acting like you care to get someone to do what you want or what you think God wants them to do. Do less of that, and people will see a lot less of you and more of Jesus. He goes on to say, when we make our opinions and our agendas more important than the difficult people God made, we turn the wine right back into water. And I don't know about you, but that does not sound good. So we don't want to do that. We want to drop our agendas for people and lead with love instead. And the best part about this is when we drop our agendas and just relax, the next 3 things I'm going to tell you about become infinitely easier to do. Infinitely simpler. Because it lets us off the hook from being the moral police and these functional saviors, and it frees us up to just be people's friends. So the second thing we must do to lead with love is to love at close range. Ultimately, Jesus came to be with us. Emmanuel, another name for him, it literally means God with us. And so we are to be friends, and we are to be neighbors, and we are to be classmates and coworkers who draw close to the people around us in practical, purposeful ways. And we make this so complicated sometimes. Jesus never did. Look at Matthew 25, verses 35 and 36. I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was homeless, and you gave me a room. I was shivering, and you gave me clothes. I was sick, and you stopped to visit. I was in prison, and you came to me. In other words, I was lonely, and you invited me to sit with you at lunch. I was a teenager, and you listened to me talk about the perils of the AZ merit testing without checking your phone. I was a widower, and you mowed my lawn. I was worried about the test result, and you came and sat with me in the waiting room. I came to your church's Super Bowl party, needed a blanket, and you found one for me in Janet's car. Loving at close range is all about trading our binoculars for bootstraps and finding simple, meaningful ways to get down in the mud with people and just be with them like Jesus was with us. You know, so often wonder what would have happened if even just once I had asked that family from across the street to come over for tacos, to get to know them, and then to see them out the door with an invitation to come back the next week for s'mores and a fire. That could have started a friendship that may have led to a different result for that family. So leading with love means dropping our agendas, which frees up our hands and our hearts to love people at close range. The third thing we must remember to do is stick around. Leading with love means leaning into the slow work of God. Ours is a God who waits. His work is slow and it's measured, and ours gets to be slow too. We can't just bail on people when it gets too weird or too messy or too inconvenient. We do not get to stomp off to the backyard because something is bugging us out front. If we do that, you guys, people die without hope, without peace, without an eternity spent with God. We have to stick it out and stick around. We have this tremendous opportunity to be a fixed point in a swirling sky for people. But we can't be that if we're impatient. If we run out after the first disagreement or sign of trouble, we're all doomed. If we're serious about loving people, we need to put in the unsung, unsexy, unseen, inconvenient time it takes to discover who they are and what they need. Shannon Martin, in a phenomenal book called The Ministry of Ordinary Places, came out last year. She says this, she says, real love takes time. Its growth is slow and sustained. If we want to love the world around us, and Jesus warned often that this is half of what classifies us as his, we have to pass by each other, get a good look, call it beautiful, and stick around. Finally, to lead with love, we must never give up. Galatians 6:9 says, let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. We can't quit, even and especially when we get it wrong. We have got to keep our hands on the plow in every new neighborhood, in every new school, in every new workplace, and in every new church that God places us in, trusting that the eventual harvest is not dependent on our skill loving people flawlessly, but rather on our willingness to keep showing up for them. Let me show you what I mean. So when we left that rental house in Las Vegas, we moved into a home, brand new home, bought this brand new home in a neighborhood that was still under construction. In fact, only 6 of the 12 houses on our actual street, let alone the rest of the neighborhood, were even built. Part of why we chose this particular neighborhood was because the homes were designed with front of house living. They had these great covered patios that would kind of draw you outside to be with your neighbors. It was also designed with this beautiful community pool instead of having a bunch of pools in everybody's backyards, so that it was a central meeting place for the community. And we didn't spend a lot of time out there the first 6 months because the construction was insane. They're like rafters. I can't just let my kids go play outside with rafters going all over there. But anyway, And so me, as a full-time telecommuter, someone who works at home all day long, that gave me plenty of time to watch my new neighbors from a very safe distance. And so I figured out pretty quickly that the middle-aged guys to the right of us, were gay. They probably didn't have any kids. They were maybe into Buddhism, because at one point this giant, and I mean giant, you guys, it's like taller than me, fountain shows up in their front yard to go in their backyard. It was like of a Buddhist monk, and I was like, whoa, these guys are extra. Like, this is weird. And next to them was a mom and her 2 kids, and I think her mom and maybe a boyfriend or a husband. I don't know. He wasn't there all the time, so I wasn't really sure what was going on with that whole situation. And so I watched this. And so in the months we waited for the construction to wrap up and the pool to open up, I knew I had some decisions to make. I could either find ways to get to know these strange creatures, or I could invent ways to keep them at arm's length. I could assume things about them, or I could learn things about them. I could presume that I had something to teach them, or I could consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, they had a few things to teach me. In the end, I decided not to give up, though my track record with this wasn't great. I started by introducing myself to them at the pool, exchanging phone numbers so we could reach each other if one of us ever had an egg-related baking emergency. I began reading on my front patio when they came home from work and needed someone to talk to. Whenever I made salsa, I'd pour extra in a mason jar, and I'd send one of the kids over to give it to them. When they invited me over, I always said yes. When they had surgery, I cooked for them. When they showed me pictures of the adult daughters I didn't know they could possibly have, I asked them to tell me all about them. When they threw a party, we all showed up. When their parents died, I sat with them. When they got married, I congratulated them. When their incredible work was on display, I went to see it. When their son was in a play, I bought tickets. When they fell on hard times and asked for my prayers, I said them. When a gunman walked into an Orlando nightclub and targeted their community, I reached out to them and I said I was so sorry. And when the time came to leave them, I didn't know if I could. Our families had become entrenched and intertwined with genuine love flowing between us. 2 nights before we left, I headed over to the guy's house next door, Jim and Joe, to say goodbye. Ryan was here with you guys, and I was just like, I just need to go and just talk to them. Sit down in their dining room and say some words. It was one of the coolest conversations of my entire life. I won't go into all of it, but at the end, with tears in their eyes, they told me how they never expected a pastor's family to like them, to pay them any attention, let alone love them. They didn't expect a Christian family to want anything to do with them, but that we did, and that it mattered, and that they now see Jesus and Christians in a way that they hadn't before. Those are their exact words. As their door closed behind me that night, I thought, this is what Jesus brought us to Las Vegas to see and to live and to learn. He did not bring us there to stand on doorsteps. He brought us there to sit down in dining rooms and be with people. Not 3 weeks after we moved here, our other neighbor, Tondi, showed up at our house here in Scottsdale. She just wanted to make sure we were okay, kind of approve the whole situation. And also she came like dying to talk to me about this book I had left on her doorstep the moment we pulled away with the U-Haul and she was at work. And it was a book called For the Love by Jen Hatmaker. I hope you've heard of it. If you've not, especially ladies, go get it now. But don't go on Amazon right this second. I'm not finished. Anyway, she was bursting to tell me about it. And so we had a great weekend, caught up, she proved the situation. And then before she left, she asked if she could come to church. Now, I had been trying to get this girl to come to church for a while. And listen, I had seen the back of her her stove, like, you know where you pull it out and all that gunk is like dripping down the side? I had seen that, so I was like in a place where I could ask her to come to church. And she never did. But then she came to this church and she sat right there in the second row. And I was just like, God, I don't even know. Like, you're awesome. And then about 8 months later, I went to her house and I walked into her entryway and there were these frames. And I looked closer and she had ripped out pages of that book and had framed them. And then I walk up into her living room. Same thing, frames, every room in the house. She had framed words of God's love for her and guidance for her family all over her house. So, yeah. I wanted to introduce you to them to show you that the way of Jesus can absolutely be trusted. When we drop our agendas and begin loving people at close range and commit to sticking around even when it gets hard and refuse to give up when God gives us new people to meet, lives change, especially ours. So I'm going to end now with a passage here from Shannon Martin's book that I mentioned earlier. And I just want you to let these words fall heavy on your hearts and be in thought right now just about who you might be hearing these words for today. Shannon writes, "This is how we love, by focusing so intently on each other that we can't help ourselves. We watch from our windows, we venture outside, we receive the help that's offered. We find ourselves connected in spite of everything we thought once stood between us. When we open our lives to those from whom we used to keep a safe distance, it changes everything. Our well-being becomes mashed up with that of our neighbors, and this shifts how we think about our homes and our time and our money and our ideas about everything from personal responsibility to success. Loving people at close range unveils all we haven't known, the stuff we've gotten wrong for a long time or maybe forever. Uncomfortable as this can feel, it's exactly what God intended. God uses the people near to us to do surgery on our hearts and turn them toward the things that capture His. There should be no segment of life left unscathed by the scalpel of the gospel. And we get to do this because it has been done for us. The work is sanctifying, and we can't possibly do it alone. So wherever you are, know you've been planted there with purpose. Jam your flag into the hard-packed soil and claim it, not for what it is, but for what it soon will be.